Welcome to Top Stories Hub. Today we've got a new story, a mystery you'll want to unravel. Hey, lady, back off the piano. It's for professionals only. That sharp order bounced off the Vatican's massive hall, cutting through the air right before the whole world hit pause to hear what came next. Nobody had a clue that the elderly nun they were trying to hush up had penned a tune that would outlast wars, borders, and even time itself. This is the story of Sister Emma, a woman who flew under the radar but whose music patched up hearts across generations, from a tiny, overlooked chapel to movements that swept the globe. Picture this: one simple song, born from humility, setting millions of souls ablaze and turning quiet moments into sacred havens. Hold up, before we dig in, hit that subscribe button on our channel. We're dropping powerful, heartfelt stories like this every single day. Oh, and toss a comment below to let us know where you're tuning in from. Thanks a ton. Alright, let's dive back into the tale. Sister, you're not supposed to be here. The words sliced through the soft buzz of the crowd like a cold wind whipping through a holy sanctuary. The security guard's stern voice rang across the shiny marble floors of the sprawling basilica, freezing footsteps and shutting down whispered chatter. In that tense second, Sister Emma stood tall, her worn hands gripping a delicate rosary, her eyes that had witnessed both crushing grief and glimmers of salvation, locked on a grand piano that gleamed softly under the glow of ancient chandeliers. The guard wasn't messing around, his tone as rigid as a steel gate. This piano's reserved for performers. Step back, please. His words, clipped and precise, carried the weight of an unwritten rule, a nudge that even in a place of worship, order is king. But there was something in Sister Emma's unwavering stare, a spark of stubborn hope, maybe the faint glow of a passion she'd buried long ago, that made the room feel alive with potential. Right then, as if time itself teetered on the brink of evening, the crowd's murmurs flipped from mild confusion to a buzzing, almost painful curiosity. Gossip spread like a spark in dry grass. Is that the nun who used to play in that old chapel? What's she doing near a fancy piano? The question swirled, heavy with doubt but tinged with compassion, because nobody could miss the mysterious vibe that wrapped around her like a shadow. Sister Emma was a puzzle, a living piece of a lost age when music wasn't just notes on a page but a way to speak straight to the heart. Back in the day, she was known for soul-stirring melodies that filled a battered, war-ravaged chapel, a safe haven where her music pushed back against the chaos outside. Now, standing in the Vatican's dazzling halls, she felt like a half-remembered dream, a faint echo of history bold enough to demand its moment. Her eyes shimmered with tears she hadn't shed, not born of sadness, but of a deep, wordless yearning. For decades, people had brushed off the pure magic of her talent, seeing her as just the old nun stuck dusting pews and tending to forgotten corners. But tonight, that piano, its black and white keys sparkling like a world of untapped dreams, called to her like an old friend she hadn't seen in years. With a slow, purposeful step, she edged forward, her shoes tapping lightly on the chilly stone floor, each sound a pulse that whispered it was never too late to chase her fate. The room was thick with tension, a force that seemed to clutch at everyone's chest. The guard, tasked with keeping things in line, paused for a split second, his face showing a tug-of-war between sticking to the rules and sensing the weight of what was happening. Behind him, the high society musicians and choir folks, decked out in their flashy outfits, swapped smirks and low grumbles, their voices oozing with scorn and disbelief. They'd always thought only the elite, those with top-tier training and fancy credentials, deserved to touch that piano. Not one of them saw it coming. A humble nun, armed with nothing but faith and a lifetime carved into her weathered face, daring to challenge their world. Sister Emma, the guard pressed again. His voice easing just a touch, like he could see the fierce resolve in her eyes. Please, step away. But she wasn't begging for a pass. Her presence was a quiet demand, a silent claim to her right to be there. Every step she took pulsed with memories of her younger days, when she'd weave lullabies for broken spirits in a village under siege, each note a bold stand against the hopelessness of war. Her movements carried the faint hum of a time when her music was the only beacon in a darkness that threatened to swallow everything. Across the hall, unease rippled through the big shots and dignitaries. Their eyes flicked nervously between the determined nun and the towering piano. A wave of hushed mutters rolled through. Some were intrigued, others flat-out offended. What did it say about their world that a woman so grounded in modesty had the guts to approach an instrument worshipped by those who lived for the spotlight? The air buzzed with unspoken energy as a young assistant, fresh on the job and shaking with nerves, shuffled forward. There's some kind of issue at the back entrance," he mumbled into his walkie-talkie, his voice barely a whisper. His wide eyes, flickering with both fear and a sliver of hope, searched for a nod of approval from the crowd. But all he got were puzzled looks and furrowed brows. In the midst of the rising chaos, a figure appeared at the edge of the gathering, commanding instant, reverent silence. Bishop Michael, dressed in plain but stately robes, moved with a calm, purposeful grace, his presence radiating both strength and kindness. It was like the room's wild energy had been tamed, waiting for this exact moment. The crowd parted like a slow-moving river, their hearts pounding in unison as the bishop approached. For a fleeting second, the entire hall held its breath as if the universe itself was hanging on his next move. In that quiet, it hit everyone. This wasn't about power plays or following the book. It was about faith, about believing that even the smallest spark could carry a flame of inspiration. As Bishop Michael drew closer, Sister Emma didn't waver. Her steady, glowing gaze met his, blending humility with a subtle, unshakable defiance. When he reached her, the bishop spoke to the guard with a voice that was warm but firm. "Let her show us what she's got," he said, his words carrying a quiet power that shut down any chance of argument. The guard, caught off guard by the bishop's step-in, backed off, silently agreeing that some things matter more than rigid rules. In that moment, the usual pecking order faded, replaced by something bigger, a call to celebrate the human spirit in all its forms. The room seemed to exhale as the church leader gave his rare blessing to the unfolding scene. The snide looks and mocking whispers melted into a shared stillness. The high and mighty musicians, who'd been so sure of their grip on the art, now stood humbled, their downcast eyes and softened postures offering a silent apology for underestimating her. With the bishop's kind words still lingering in the sacred air, Sister Emma stepped toward the grand piano. Her presence, shaped by years of quiet sacrifice and unspoken victories, felt almost otherworldly against the backdrop of intricate marble walls and golden frescoes that told stories of centuries past. Each step she took carried the weight of her life, decades spent comforting fragile hearts, years of humble service that never chased applause. Now, under the watchful eyes of everyone from doubtful elites to devoted believers, it was as if the hall itself was holding its breath, waiting for a lost art to come back to life. Without a word, she settled in front of the shining piano. Her fingers, worn by time, seemed to hum with a hidden energy as they hovered gently over the keys. A charged pause hung in the air, a moment caught between yesterday and today as the gleaming instrument sensed the flood of emotions about to break free. The space around her seemed to pulse with the memory of songs that had mended shattered spirits, of melodies that had calmed the wild storm of despair. And then, with a deep, steady breath that seemed to pull strength from the very people around her, she started to play. In that sacred hush, Sister Emma's music unleashed a flood of feelings that washed over everyone in the room. A wave of nostalgia crashed through the basilica, tangled up with a fresh sense of awe. Her melody spun a captivating tale, pulling up long-forgotten memories of a young girl with big dreams in a dusty little town, of a tough-as-nails spirit who chose a quiet life over shame, who found beauty in life's hidden nooks despite a world that barely noticed her. It was like the piano turned into a time machine, whisking everyone back to an age when music was a living, breathing prayer, each note a heartfelt plea to the heavens. The sound bounced off the holy walls, stirring up memories tucked away in the hearts of everyone there. Even the old statues and faded frescoes seemed to perk up, as if they couldn't wait to see this lost art come roaring back to life, bigger than any human limits. For a split second, it felt like the whole universe hit the brakes. The final chord hung in the air like a blessing, tying the past to the present in a quiet, sacred bond. In that heart-stopping moment, tears welled up in some eyes, while others bowed their heads, silently grateful. Sister Emma's performance was beyond words, the peak of a life spent in humble service, now reborn with the unstoppable force of art and faith. As the last echoes of her song melted into a holy calm, the silence that followed wasn't awkward or hollow. It was deep, soul-shaking reflection. Every person inside those ancient walls felt brushed by a grace that was timeless yet life-changing. The takeaway was crystal clear. Real art, the pure kind, soars above bias and tradition, carrying the power to heal and renew. Even as her music's faint whispers lingered in the room's corners, the crowd was forever changed. The stiff, proud stances of the high-flying performers softened into something humbler, and the walls built by years of stuck-up rules started to crack under the weight of her raw, honest passion. Right there, on that sacred stage, Sister Emma didn't just take back her spot. She rewrote what it meant to be an artist. As the crowd slowly shook off their reverent daze, the air buzzed with the promise of change. a vibe that reached way beyond the basilica's towering ceilings, sparking hearts and minds with a reminder that true greatness isn't about status or fancy training, but about chasing beauty through the soul's own language. Nobody clapped right away. It was like the room forgot how to breathe, how to snap back to normal after something so out of this world. Sister Emma's final note floated there, like a wisp of holy smoke, light, full of memory, impossible to pin down with words. Some folks grabbed at their hearts, feeling like they'd been split open. Others just hung their heads, kicking themselves for their earlier snide remarks and snap judgments. But in that heavy quiet, one person moved. Bishop Michael stepped forward, his steps soft but steady, like something bigger than pomp or procedure was guiding him. His face was gentle, etched with a sorrow too deep to name and a hope too fresh to hold back. He stopped next to Sister Emma, who was still at the piano bench, her hands resting calmly on the keys, head tilted down, like she'd poured every ounce of herself into that last chord and had nothing left to give. He didn't say a word at first. Instead, Bishop Michael just looked at her with eyes that had seen wars, scandals, miracles, and heartbreak, yet still chose love. Then, in a voice that wasn't loud or weak but rang with truth like church bells, he said, "What we just heard wasn't only music, it was a prayer." The crowd shifted, the silence broken by sniffles, soft gasps of wonder, and the squeak of pews as people stood, not to clap, but to honor her. Even the smug conductor, who'd thrown shade with a raised eyebrow and a smirk just half an hour ago, stood frozen. His baton, once a symbol of his ego, dangled uselessly in his hand. "I know her now," a shaky voice muttered from the stage's edge. It was Father James, one of the oldest folks in the Vatican's music archives. His usually stone-cold face was wet with tears. "She's the one who wrote Sanctus. Back in '52, he said, his voice trembling. "We thought the score was lost in the Milan bombings, but it wasn't. It was alive in her." His voice cracked. She was a genius. Heads whipped around. The truth hit like a spark on dry tinder. The crowd's mood swung from stunned quiet to buzzing curiosity, then shock, then guilt. The snickers, the cutting whispers, the orders to shoo her away, they rang in their ears now like mistakes made in broad daylight. And Sister Emma? She stayed quiet, not out of pride or exhaustion, but because she didn't need to speak. Her life had already said it all, note by note, through the piano. She stood slowly, her back a little hunched with age, her frame as frail as a wisp of candle smoke. But there was no weakness in her, only grace. She turned to Bishop Michael and offered a gentle smile, the kind that carried the weight of seeing too much and forgiving it all. "I played that song for the kids," she said, her voice softer than a breeze. "Back in the war, when bombs were falling and there was no food, no light, I played Sanctus to remind them that even in the dark, God's still beautiful." A shiver ran through the crowd like a breeze over calm water. Bishop Michael lowered his head. "And you never asked for a spotlight." "Didn't need one," she answered softly. "I played for the one who hears me when nobody else does." That's when the conductor, shaking like a leaf, stepped toward her, his movement slow and respectful. The arrogance, the swagger, it was gone. He looked like a kid who'd just learned he'd been wrong. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice thick with feeling. "For doubting you, for laughing at something I didn't get." She looked at him for a long moment, then reached out, her touch light and kind, resting on his hand. "You were just chasing music," she said. "But we sometimes forget music starts in the quiet." Her words wrapped the room like a warm embrace, a blessing that settled over everyone. The big-shot singers and musicians trained at the best schools money could buy now looked at her, not as a rival, but with deep respect. This woman had lived through war, cared for the poor, created timeless beauty, and showed up not for fame but to share a truth through her piano keys. Bishop Michael moved back to the podium, raising a hand to hush the crowd. The Vatican's camera crew, who'd only planned to stream the main show, swung their lenses back to the stage, sensing history in the making. "Today," he announced, "we're switching things up." The crowd gasped. "The concert won't kick off with the orchestra," he went on, "but with Sister Emma's music. Her song, Thought Lost, will now ring out to the world, calling us to pause and reflect. And she," he turned to her, "will take her rightful place." The applause finally broke free, not the loud, showy kind you get after a stunt, but the kind that comes when people feel small, touched, and thankful to have seen something real. It started in the back, where pilgrims and nuns from other convents had gathered, and rolled forward like a wave. Sister Emma stood still for a moment, then dipped her head, her hand brushing her rosary again. Just one thing, she said to the bishop. When I play again, dim the lights, please, so nobody's looking at me, just at him. He smiled. Consider it done. That night, thousands filled Vatican Square. Candles flickered along the steps. A deep quiet settled as Sister Emma was guided to the same piano under a starry sky. Giant screens showed her lined face, her closed eyes, her tender hands gliding over the keys. No big speech, no fancy title, no hype, just stillness. And then the first note. The world, always so noisy, stopped to listen. In that pause, something holy flowed between every heart there, something stronger than music. It was Mercy, Memory, a woman who played, not for cheers, but for souls. And now finally, the world was still enough to hear her. Her notes floated out, gentle but steady, like birds set free from shaky hands, climbing higher with every phrase. Vatican Square, usually buzzing with tourists and pilgrims, turned into a sacred haven. Even the breeze held its breath as Sister Emma's fingers danced across the keys under the open night. That grand piano, once a trophy for the elite, now served a melody meant to heal, not impress. And heal it did, mending the unseen scars of countless hearts. In the soft glow of candles, strangers cried without shame. A tourist, there by chance, yanked off his earbuds and forgot to hit record on his phone. A nun in the back gripped her cross so hard her knuckles paled, her eyes gleaming like she was seeing a miracle. Sister Emma wasn't performing, she was praying. Her music was a conversation with the divine, and everyone there was just lucky to catch a piece of it. There was no flash in her movements, only deep respect. Her hands, rough from years of hard work, moved with a softness that took your breath away, like she was touching something holy. Maybe she was. A single tear slipped down Bishop Michael's cheek as he sat quietly in the front row, hands clasped, lips slightly parted, not in shock, but in surrender. He'd seen plenty in his life, golden cathedrals, royal symphonies, crowds that stretched forever. But he'd never seen God so clearly as in this frail woman whose only stage was a wooden bench, whose only crown was her silver hair tucked neatly back. She played Sanctus again, but it wasn't the same. The version from earlier in the basilica was soft, personal, like a note hidden under years of pain. This one? It was her letting go, a farewell wrapped in memory. It burst with life, sunrises, rainstorms, funerals, laughter, kids' songs, and hymns from refugees. It was her whole life set free. Every swell was a gasp after years of holding her breath. Every gentle fade was a goodbye to the hurt she never talked about, the praise she never wanted, the life she chose in quiet. And the crowd felt it. They didn't need anyone to tell them this mattered. It hit them deep, in their bones, waking up some old, aching longing they didn't even know they had. It wasn't about the piano, or faith, or even Sister Emma. It was about Grace. Grace found them that night. A guy in his 40s, once a hotshot pianist who gave up after a car crash, left him with just 2 working fingers, bald in the middle of the square, not from envy, but from freedom. He'd forgotten music could matter. 2 teens who'd snuck into mess around stood frozen, their phones dangling, ignored. One muttered, "Is this what praying feels like?" An older woman who'd lost her son to war and hadn't touched a piano in years because it hurt too much to remember the lullabies she sang, found her hands drifting in the air, tracing the chords, tears carving paths down her weathered face. And through it all, Sister Emma never looked up, never waved, never played for show. She just gave what was in her, her music, her story, her memory, her miracle. Far off, St. Peter's bells chimed midnight, and with them, her last note hung like a delicate thread in the air, light, complete, forever. The silence that came next wasn't just quiet. It was sacred. Then something incredible happened. Sister Emma stood, a soft breeze tugging at her habit's hem. Her hands fell to her sides. She bowed not to the crowd, but to the altar past the square, the cross rising over Rome's rooftops. It wasn't for applause. It was for gratitude. Then she turned to walk away. But before she could step off, Bishop Michael stood. "Sister Emma," he called gently. She paused, turning back with a humble smile. He walked to her, not like a big-shot leader, but like a man who'd just glimpsed something divine. He offered his hand. She took it, and in front of everyone, he said words that would echo through time. "Tonight, you gave the church its heart back." No clapping, no need, just tears and respect. He leaned close, whispering something the cameras missed. Her face softened, emotions breaking through. Then, arm in arm, they walked slowly back into the basilica. But that wasn't the end. By morning, the video of her performance was everywhere, not pushed by Vatican PR or news outlets, but by the shaky hands of those who'd been there. The live stream, meant for a fancy choir's opening, caught Sister Emma's second performance in full, raw, unfiltered, real. By dawn, millions had seen it. By lunchtime, she was the nun who played the keys of heaven. Sister Emma didn't give a hoot about the fame. She was back at her convent, kneeling in the garden, softly humming a tune while she watered her roses. Reporters set up camp outside, and big-shot music directors from top-tier conservatories sent frantic letters pleading to sit down with her, celebrate her, or record her work. She turned them all down with a polite smile. She'd said everything she needed to through her music, her grace, and a life lived quietly but remembered with a roar. Still, one kid, a young boy from Syria whose family had escaped to Rome the year before, left her a gift, a drawing of a nun at a piano with wings sketched on her back. He slid it under the convent gate, scrawling just one word in wobbly handwriting, Mercy Dash. She tacked it up above her modest desk where it stayed like a quiet treasure. That same day when Bishop Michael gave his weekly sermon, he slipped in a single thought: don't ever judge someone by their silence. Some folks carry their song inside for a lifetime, waiting for the world to hush up and listen. A week had rolled by since Vatican Square went still for the music of a soul the world had overlooked, and her melody still lingered, crossing seas and time zones. It was like a glowing lantern in a dark hallway, lighting up memories. Her song played in hospitals, bringing calm to restless patients, in tiny chapels where priests shed tears alone, and in classrooms where kids watched the video, at first puzzled, then silent, touched by something too big for words. At the heart of it all, Sister Emma slipped back into her routine like nothing had changed. Morning prayers, sweeping the chapel, yanking weeds from the cracked brick wall at the convent's edge, her fellow nuns acted like it was just another day. Maybe they'd always known what the world was just catching on to. But something had shifted, subtle but real. Before dawn, a few extra footsteps echoed toward the chapel, strangers, musicians, pilgrims, young girls clutching notebooks, their eyes wide, hoping she'd play again. She didn't. Not there, not then. For her, that night wasn't a starting line, it was a finish. She'd offered her last piece, not to the crowd, not to the church, not even to the bishop, but to God. She'd tied up a lifetime in that square, and sitting at the keys again would be like reopening a letter she'd already mailed. She didn't need to prove anything, perform for anyone, or convince a soul. She'd played her life. But one day, the quiet came calling again, this time from inside the convent walls. Mother Abigail stood at the garden's edge, watching Sister Emma trim basil with care. She looked nervous, her fingers twisting in a way Emma had never seen. "Someone's here to see you," she said. Emma glanced up, a little surprised. "More reporters?" "No," Abigail hesitated. "He says he's the last kid from your village." Time froze. The shears slipped from Emma's hands, landing in the dirt next to the roots she'd been tending. Her breath hitched, sharp and sudden, like a seed long buried breaking through the soil. "My village," she murmured. "He's an orphan. Says he remembers a girl playing music in a cellar while the world fell apart above them." Emma stood slowly, brushing soil off her knees. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from a reverence that only comes when the past you thought was gone steps into your present. Inside, a man waited just beyond the chapel doors, in his late 50s now, silver streaks weaving through dark hair. He wore a plain sweater, no camera or mic, just a folded letter in one hand and an old cassette tape in the other. When she walked in, he turned and their eyes met, no words needed. He dropped to one knee, not in awe, but in memory. "You're real," he said, his voice rough. "I thought maybe I just dreamed you." She gave a soft smile. "And I thought the fire took all of you." He stood, his voice trembling. "When the bombs started and the walls caved in, I was sure I was done for. But then I heard you. I was hiding under the pews and the piano kicked in. Everything was gone, but that music, it kept me going." He opened his hand, revealing the cassette, its label faded, scratched in a kid's handwriting. "Light Song Dash. My foster dad found this in my pocket. I didn't know where it came from until I saw the Vatican video. Those notes hit, and I knew." Emma took the tape, her fingers quivering as she touched a relic of a moment she thought war, smoke, and prayers had erased. Her breath caught when she spotted the tiny star he'd drawn in the label's corner. She remembered. She remembered this boy, the silent one who stopped talking after his parents were taken. He'd sat behind the broken confessional for weeks, refusing food, refusing tears, until one night she stayed up way past curfew and played just for him. Not a victory anthem or a hymn, but a lullaby, crafted for kids who'd lost it all. "I'm a composer now," he said quietly. "Not because I was some prodigy, I wasn't, but because of that night, that song. That woman who played while the roof crumbled." He pulled a thick, well-worn folder from his coat. "I've spent 30 years weaving a symphony around your melody. I call it Sanctus Resurrection Dash, but it's missing its core, the original. I've tried to rebuild it, but I can't. Nobody can. Not unless. She got it before he finished. He wasn't asking for a show. He wanted closure, truth, a thread to tie all those lost kids back together. Emma looked at the tape, then at the piano in the chapel's corner, its lid shut, untouched for months. She hadn't meant to play again, not for a crowd, not even for a friend. But this wasn't a gig. It was a reunion. That afternoon, behind locked doors and stained glass windows glowing with golden light, she lifted the lid. The man, now David, sat across from her, eyes shut, listening. Slowly, with hands more weathered than ever, she played the original. No frills, no flair, just the lullaby from that cellar. The tune that once shielded broken hearts under a collapsing sky. It was slower now, more delicate, but its heart still beat strong. When she finished, David was in tears, but more than that, he was smiling. She reached across the piano, took his hand and said, "Now you can finish it." And he did. 3 months later, in a small Venice theater, Sanctus Resurrection debuted. No ads, no media blitz, just a lone flyer tacked to a community board. A symphony born in war, a lullaby reborn in peace. Sister Emma sat in the front row. She didn't play or speak, but when her lullaby came back near the end, carried by a full orchestra's strings, harps and light, she closed her eyes and smiled. Because sometimes, music isn't yours to keep. It's yours to share. A spark passed on. A story held. A soul cherished. The applause rose not like a storm, but like soft waves, tentative at first, almost afraid to break the sacred thread woven through the hall. It grew, not in victory, but in gratitude, steady and quiet, until the whole place pulsed with reverence. Nobody jumped up or cheered. They stood together, hands clasped, hearts open, tears falling without shame or pride. Sister Emma stayed seated in the front row, calm and still, like she was watching her younger self step out of a dream. The final part of Sanctus Resurrection circled back to the lullaby she'd played on a rickety piano under a war-torn roof. Now it soared, layered with violins, lifted by cellos, sung by a kid's choir. Not pitch perfect, but bursting with raw heart. Somehow, she felt those children from that crumbling chapel were there too. Not in person, but in the sound, the memory, the peace. Every note carried them, alive again. As the last chord faded, David, no longer that scared orphan, but a man with silver in his hair and trembling hands, turned to her. He didn't say a word. He just bowed, deeper than any musician ever had. She gave a gentle nod, her lips curving into a smile that knew how precious these full-circle moments were. As the curtain fell, a journalist crept up, notebook in hand, eyes red from crying since the second movement. She could hardly speak. "Sister, can I ask, how does it feel, knowing your lullaby's now a symphony?" Emma looked at her warmly, pausing before answering in a voice soft as a prayer. "It feels like it was never mine to hold on to." The journalist blinked, torn between writing it down and just soaking it in. Emma went on, her voice gentle. "Real music, it's not ours. It flows through us like a breeze through a church. We carry it, sure, but we don't own it. Hold it too tight and it loses its wings." The young woman shut her notebook. There was nothing more to say. That evening, as Sister Emma headed back to her convent, the stars seemed closer, low and golden like candle flames scattered across the night. The driver offered to take her to the gate, but she asked to stop at the corner. She wanted to walk. Venice's streets were calm, lit by the odd lantern and the gentle ripple of water. Her steps were slow, intentional, not a trip, but a homecoming. She passed a narrow alley where an 8-year-old girl sat with her mom, sketching chalk hearts on a stone wall. As Emma walked by, the girl looked up and whispered, "You're the piano lady." Emma smiled. "I'm just someone who knows what love sounds like." The girl tilted her head. "Did you write the music?" "No," Emma said kindly. "I heard it and I passed it on." The girl mulled it over, then said with all the honesty a kid could muster, "That's a pretty cool thing to do." Emma nodded. "It is." She reached the convent gate just as the church bell chimed 9. Mother Abigail was waiting, holding a candle, her eyes shining with more than just its light. "It was stunning," she said simply. "It was my goodbye," Emma replied. They stood there, still for a moment, before stepping inside together. In the days that followed, the world kept spinning. News moved on, headlines shifted. While clips of her performance floated online and her soundtrack crept up the classical charts, Sister Emma sank back into the life she loved best, service without the spotlight. But echoes don't fade. Soon, letters poured into the convent, hundreds, then thousands, from every corner of the globe. A girl from the Philippines who'd survived a tsunami wrote that the lullaby felt like her grandma's heartbeat. A prisoner in Louisiana said the symphony was the first thing in 20 years that made him think he could feel again. A mom in Ukraine wrote, "I played your song while my kids slept in a bunker. I think it kept us safe." A hospice nurse in Sao Paulo said, "We play it in our ward now. Even folks too far gone to talk smile." The convent turned into something new, a hub of grace. Sister Emma never asked for the attention, but the world was listening. So, she answered every letter by hand, writing late into the night by candlelight, her handwriting as careful and warm as her music. To the kid who'd lost her dad, your tears are prayers, and prayers outlast death. To the soldier who couldn't sleep, let the quiet after the song be your peace, that quiet is God. To the boy who dreamed of piano but had no cash, find an old keyboard, a table, even play on air. Music's in your heart, not your hands. She signed each one, with light, Sister Emma Dash. Eventually, the Vatican reached out again. A scholar wanted to archive her compositions, some on brittle parchment, others jotted on grocery lists or choir sheets. He expected maybe 10 or 15. He left with 72. Some were half-finished, others in a code only she could crack, blending symbols, scripture, and bits of lyrics. Sitting with her, he went through each one. She recalled every note, every phrase, every reason. "This one came after I lost a friend in the famine," she said softly, touching a page thin as tissue. "It's not about grief, it's about coming home." The scholar sat speechless, floored. On his last day, he asked if she'd consider publishing a book of her work. She gave a faint smile. "I'll share them," she said, "but not for glory. Let them go where silence needs mending, to the world's quiet corners." And that's where they went. One piece played during a birth in an Ethiopian village, another at a funeral in rural Canada, a third at a wedding for two young teachers who'd survived war. Each note landed, not in grand cathedrals, but in life's tender, fragile moments. Sister Emma watched it all from her convent, never stepping out again. Years slipped by. Her hair grew whiter, her steps slower, but her eyes stayed sharp. She'd sit by the chapel window at dusk, listening not to the outside world, but to the one within. Sometimes a nun would ask if she was writing new music. "No," she'd whisper, "just remembering." One night, as the stars rose high and the moon poured light over the convent wall like cream from the sky, Sister Emma didn't show for morning prayers. They found her at her desk, head resting on her arm, a small candle still flickering nearby. A final letter lay there, unmailed, addressed to no one, but open, like it was for everyone who'd ever heard her. It read, "To those who hold silence inside, hear this, you're not empty. Your music, waiting to be heard. With all my light, Sister Emma." The convent bells tolled slowly that morning, not with panic, but with a gentle goodbye. Their sound drifted over the rooftops like a soft prayer, wrapping the city in a hush too delicate for words. The nuns moved through the halls, not silent, but reverent, each step a memory's whisper. News of Sister Emma's passing spread, not by official word or newsflash, but like a breeze carried by angels, soft, sure, undeniable. Outside the convent, before the sun was fully up, a small group gathered, not invited, not told, but drawn by their hearts. By mid-morning, the street was packed. No signs, no reporters, just people. Some had known her, most hadn't. But each carried a piece of her gift: music, bravery, forgiveness, hope. Kids held flowers. An old man brought a beat-up cassette player and played a crackly version of her lullaby. A few nuns opened the gates, welcoming everyone into the courtyard, amazed at how far her gentle echo had reached. In the chapel, her body rested in a plain wooden casket, draped in ivory cloth, no gold, no marble, just a single candle by her head and her rosary in her hands. But next to her was something else, a single sheet of handwritten music, her last piece, unfinished. They'd found it tucked behind her Bible, just 2 lines long. But those lines, they glowed, not with flash, but with a quiet call, as if the page itself was saying, "You can finish this. You have to." When Bishop Michael heard of Sister Emma's passing, he cleared his schedule, skipping all his meetings for the day. He walked to the convent alone, dressed not in fancy robes but in simple clothes. Inside the chapel, he didn't kneel at the altar. Instead, he knelt by her casket. She wasn't just God's servant, he told the small crowd later. She was proof that God still speaks softly through the people we tend to miss. A few rows back, the composer, once a scared orphan, now a seasoned symphonist, sat clutching her final sheet of music. He hadn't said a word since he saw it, but in his quiet, a promise was taking shape. I'll finish this. And he did. For a whole year, he dropped off the radar, no interviews, no concerts, no public appearances. He holed up in a tiny monastery by the sea with just a piano, her notes, and a lifetime of memories. He pored over every letter she'd sent him, every snippet of her old songs. He played that worn-out cassette labeled Light Song over and over until its shaky notes felt like Holy Writ. He didn't try to jazz up her last piece. He listened for it, treating her 2 lines not as a starting point but as a whisper from the other side. He wrote what he thought she'd have wanted, nothing flashy, just graceful. He wove in pauses, silences that felt like breaths, spaces for reflection, for her. He called it simply Sanctus Amen. When it was done, he didn't premiere it in a grand theater or cathedral. He brought it to the chapel where she was laid to rest. There, with only a single cello, a kid's choir, and a piano, he played it for nobody but the stones and the sky. But someone caught it on video. A nun, not knowing he was there, heard the music and stood awestruck at the back door. She pulled out her phone and recorded the last 5 minutes. That clip, rough, resonant, beautifully flawed, blew up online in a day. Millions watched a man, hands shaking, pour out a melody that felt like prayer turned into sound. No hype, no narration, just music, just light. The world took notice. Schools started playing her lullaby to kick off assemblies. Hospitals asked for her sheet music to soothe patients in recovery rooms. Even in places where faith was off limits, her songs were embraced, not tied to any religion but to the human spirit. In South Korea, a young girl with autism played Sanctus perfectly on live TV, despite never having a lesson. She said it came to her in a dream. In Kenya, a blind boy learned it by feel and played it at his village's evening prayers, saying, "It makes the darkness less frightening." In Brazil, a mother on her deathbed asked her kids to play Sister Emma's music at her funeral, saying it sounded like her idea of heaven. Her name was never branded, her music never sold for profit. Yet, somehow, it spread like a breeze across an open meadow, wild, free, impossible to stop. Years rolled on. The composer, now grayer, was asked to speak at a global conference on peace and memory. He walked to the mic with just 1 line scribbled on his paper. "Sister Emma showed me that the greatest symphonies come from those who don't need the spotlight." He paused, then added quietly, "And silence isn't the lack of music, it's where music starts." That night, at the closing ceremony, the orchestra played Sanctus Amen in full, no stage lights, no clapping, just candles, tears, and light. And somewhere, maybe far off, maybe closer than we think, Sister Emma smiled. Her life, once seen as too soft, too small, too easy to ignore, had become a current, gentle but relentless, life-changing, eternal. A force that pulled the world not toward flashiness, but toward calm, toward soul, toward light. It all started with a note, not the musical kind, but a handwritten letter, folded twice and left neatly on a weathered piano bench in a quiet Lisbon chapel. It was addressed simply to whoever finds the seat holy. No signature, no return address, just 2 pages of flowing words and a single sheet of music clipped to the end. The janitor found it at dawn and set it on the chapel altar, unsure where it came from. The priest, struck by its words, read it aloud after Sunday Massachusetts. The message was straightforward but carried a timeless weight. If you've ever been scared to play, worried your hands would shake or your voice wouldn't carry, hear this. Music doesn't demand perfection. It asks for truth. Play what you've got, play what hurts, and someone will hear you. At first, only the congregation caught it. But a 12-year-old girl in the back row, knees squeezed together, fingers fidgeting, felt it hit differently. She hadn't come for mass, she was there for the piano. Her mom cleaned the chapel late at night, and sometimes when the last candle was snuffed out and nobody was around, she'd slip into the choir loft to practice. No teacher, no sheet music, just her ears and her heart. When the priest read that letter, she stood up. Something inside her broke open, not like glass smashing, but like a flower catching a sudden ray of sun. Without a word, she walked to the front of the chapel, past shocked grown-ups and curious murmurs, and sat at the piano. Her hands hovered, her breath unsteady, and then she played. The first notes were shaky, like a kid learning to talk. But then the rhythm kicked in, the melody flowed, and she let go. It wasn't a song anyone knew, but it felt old, personal, like a lullaby sung by someone who'd survived the unspeakable. The room went quiet, watching a miracle unfold, no pomp, no flash. When she finished, her cheeks damp and eyes wide, she looked at the priest and whispered, "I think I heard her." That's how they learned she'd taught herself, Sanctus, by ear, listening to recordings in her mom's kitchen while scrubbing dishes. Nobody knew how she'd done it, no one had shown her the keys. But the music had found her, through pain, through work, through silence. Word got out fast. Within weeks, she was invited to play at a small music festival in Spain. She said no at first, too nervous to be seen. But her mom, remembering the letter's words, "Music doesn't wait for perfection. It waits for honesty," told her courage isn't about being fearless, but about sharing something sacred despite the jitters. The girl said okay. When she stepped onto the stage, barefoot, in a plain blue dress, fingers trembling, she sat at the piano and whispered, "For the woman I never met but who reached me through the music." The half-full hall, expecting a sweet but amateur act, fell under a spell. She didn't just play, she became a reflection of something bigger. A teenage violinist in the crowd, just a year older, posted online later, "It was like watching someone beam pure light. I didn't know music could feel like home." Her performance clip went viral, not for flawless skill, but for its raw truth. She flubbed a note, tripped in the bridge, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the honesty she poured into every chord. People didn't just hear the song, they rediscovered pieces of themselves they'd thought were gone. Soon, music schools called. Competitions sent offers. News outlets dubbed her the miracle girl the kid's sister Emma discovered. But she wasn't interested. She turned down record deals, ignored agents, and dodged the headlines. She had one wish: to play in small spots, shelters, hospitals, orphanages, places where silence needed grace to break through. Her mom backed her up, and so did her community. One day, quietly, she visited the convent where Sister Emma had lived and died. No announcement, no cameras. She slipped through the gate like a whisper and stepped into the chapel with careful reverence. There, she found the piano, still sitting under a sunlit window. Dust had settled on its surface, but the keys were pristine, waiting. She sat, rested her fingers on the keys, and paused, not for applause or approval, but for the silence to embrace her. Then she played Sanctus Dash. It was gentler than before, airier, with pauses that stretched a little longer, like she was inviting spirits to listen. She didn't hurry or push. She let the notes drift like snowflakes. A nun watching from the corner murmured, "She's not just carrying on the music. She's hearing it." When she was done, the girl tucked a note under the piano lid. No name, no signature, just a line: "Thank you for giving me something to cling to in the dark. I'll keep passing it on." And she did. A year later, she started teaching kids like her, those with no money, no access, no confidence. She showed them not just how to hit the right keys, but how to find their own voice in the music. She told them mistakes weren't something to hide, they were part of the story. Every recital she put on ended the same: the kids played, and in the program's corner, 7 words were printed: "To be heard, you must be honest dash." Years went by. She never chased fame. But the world knew her as the girl who listened like a saint and played like a prayer. Long after her last concert, after her final lesson, people said she didn't play for the crowd, she played for the silence. And somehow, the silence always answered. In a refugee camp outside Beirut, the music found its next voice. Tents stood packed tight, a patchwork of faded canvas flapping in the heat. Kids kicked up dust, chasing crushed soda cans with bare feet. The sky above, harsh and uncaring, offered no comfort. But amid the hunger, exhaustion, and confusion of loss, something odd was happening. Every evening, right on cue, a song floated through the camp, soft at first, like a question, then steady, like a vow. It came from a busted keyboard. 3 keys were dead, the left pedal gone, the power cord patched with medical tape, but somehow its melody came out whole. An 11-year-old boy named Samir sat at it, mute since his village was destroyed. He didn't speak, not even to his little sister, whom he guarded with fierce, silent devotion. But every night, as the shadows stretched long and weary over the tents, he played the same song, Sanctus Dash. Nobody taught it to him. He said he'd heard it once on an aid worker's radio. From that fleeting moment, the melody had taken root in him, like a secret ready to bloom. Nobody in the camp knew the song's name, only that when it played, the air felt lighter. People slowed down. Moms hummed as they folded tattered blankets. Old men with haunted eyes paused, letting themselves rest, if only for a minute. It wasn't just pretty, it was vital. The aid worker who'd played the song on his radio knew it right away. He'd heard it months ago, performed by the Lisbon girl at a hospital fundraiser. That tender, wobbly, but heartfelt rendition had landed on a global playlist called Psalms for the Soul Dash. Sister Emma's lullaby, passed from one war to another, from one child to the next, had come back to where it belonged, a wounded world. Word of Samir reached a volunteer from a music therapy group. She showed up with a brand new keyboard, still boxed, and gently asked if he'd like to try it. He shook his head and stuck to the broken one. When she asked why, he whispered his first word in 2 years. "She heard me here." The volunteer cried, not for the beauty of his words, but because she knew who she was. That month they made a recording. Not in a studio, but in the camp, with wind rustling and kids giggling in the background. Samir's small fingers, too short for full octaves, moved over the keys like a traveler on a familiar path. His version wasn't perfect. The broken keys forced him to improvise. But those gaps where notes should have been made it even more powerful. That recording spread. It played at a peace summit in Geneva, silencing mid-fight diplomats. It aired at a UN memorial for lost children, with their faces glowing behind the sound. It sparked a movement, quiet, more ripple than wave. Musicians, teachers, and activists started whispering an idea. What if every country had a night of silence, pierced only by this song? What if every language could hear this melody, not as music, but as grief, memory, mercy? And so, Night of Light came to be. No big speeches, no flashy banners. Just 1 hour, once a year, when every city that joined in dimmed their lights, hushed their noise, and let Sanctus play. From Nairobi to New York, Hanoi to Paris, from the tiniest hamlet in the Pyrenees to the bustling heart of Tokyo, that same melody drifted through the air, like a gentle wave soothing a broken world. It wasn't a holiday. It was a moment to remember. Kids lit candles for those they'd lost. Grandmas clasped hands with strangers. Folks in skyscrapers and rundown shelters alike looked up, not searching for something but listening. And at the core of it all, unseen, unspoken, but impossible to ignore, was the legacy of Sister Emma. A woman once told to get away from a piano because she didn't fit in. She never aimed to spark a movement, just to play one last note before her time was up. Yet, she became the pulse of countless quiet revolts. No foundation carried her name, no statues stood in her honor, no glitzy galas celebrated her. Just echoes, just hands across continents passing along the song she'd held in silence for decades. In a rural Indian school, a young girl who'd never seen a piano learned Sanctus on a xylophone crafted from old copper pipes. In a Mississippi jail, a prisoner taught his cellmate the tune by tapping knuckles on a wall, a rhythm coded in stone. In a Japanese hospital, where patients couldn't speak, a nurse played the song every night and noticed their heart rates eased. One man, who hadn't smiled in months, broke into tears. A London researcher scribbled in her journal, "We're measuring how this melody affects the body, but maybe we should be asking why it hits us before we even hear it." Nobody could fully pin it down, not scholars, not critics. Only those who'd felt an emptiness craving something sacred got it. It wasn't magic. It was memory, longing answered, grace in plain clothes. One evening, the girl from Lisbon, now 17, was invited to speak at a peace forum. She wore a simple dress, hair pulled back, shoes worn at the edges. Before stepping on stage, the host leaned in and murmured, "You can skip the speech and just play if you want." She shook her head with a quiet smile. "Tonight, I'm gonna talk." The room fell silent. Cameras hummed. She stepped to the mic and said, "I never met Sister Emma, but I know her hands, her stillness. I know what it's like to hold music you're too afraid to let out." She paused, her gaze sweeping the crowd, voice gentle but firm. "And I know what it feels like to be told it's okay to believe that what's in you isn't just noise. It's healing, it's memory, it's light." Her fingers twitched at her sides, recalling old chords. She gave us that freedom not with fame or big stages, but with a quiet heart, with one song she never claimed as hers. She nodded, eyes glistening but holding back tears. "And now we carry it not just to honor her, but to rediscover the parts of ourselves we hid away, the parts that still believe small things count, that the world can shift, not with louder shouts, but with deeper listening." She stepped back. The room stayed hushed, then the lights softened and the piano waited. It sat under a gentle spotlight, no curtains, no hype, just smooth wood and a silent invitation. The girl from Lisbon walked toward it slowly, each step heavy with the courage of every kid who'd found their voice because someone, somewhere, dared to hum a tune in the dark. The crowd didn't clap. They didn't need to. This wasn't a show, it was a sacred watch. She sat, closed her eyes, and rested her hands on the keys, not to master them, but to hear them. For a moment, she didn't play. She breathed, letting the silence have its say. Then, like a soft rain falling over a sleeping town, the first notes of Sanctus came to life. But tonight, she wasn't alone. In Nairobi, a boy tapped the rhythm on a homemade drum, his bare hands striking cowhide. In Seoul, a string quartet joined in, their bows rising and falling like wings. In a tiny Argentine village, two sisters sang the melody in harmony, never having met the girl at the piano. Yet, somehow, they were one, a living, breathing tapestry of spirit. This wasn't planned. It was connection. They'd all heard the same story through different paths, an old nun once shushed, a song that wouldn't fade, a melody carried from hands to air to memory, crossing borders without a name, just light. And now they were responding. When the last chord faded and the hall went quiet, the girl opened her eyes and stood. Her hands shook slightly, not from nerves but from something deeper, unspoken. She faced the crowd and, for the first time ever, spoke words she hadn't practiced. "Tonight I didn't play for you," she said softly. "I played with you." And around the world, where streams reached homes, villages, and refugee camps, people got it. In that shared quiet after the final note, they'd all remembered a grandma's lullaby, a dad's farewell, a prayer muttered under breath, a time they nearly gave up but kept going. The next generation started creating not just versions of Sanctus Dash, but new songs in its spirit. Raw, bold, unpolished, honest music that held no pride, only giving. In an Oslo school for deaf kids, a teacher built a keyboard that buzzed with low vibrations. A 10-year-old boy who'd never heard a sound played Sanctus with his fingertips, calling it a song of stars. In a Syrian shelter, two teens crafted instruments from scrap metal and rebar, writing a tune called Prayer in Dust Dash. Asked what it meant, they said, "It's about finding God in the wreckage." In a Chicago juvenile detention center, a girl doing time for a mistake she couldn't take back asked for paper and wrote "Forgiveness" in F minor dash. When she played it, the room went so still even the guards forgot to keep watch. The music wasn't flawless, that was the beauty. It was human, spreading like a new way of speaking, tied not to scales or beats, but to truth. A kid in Guatemala heard a recording and added flute. A Tibetan monk turned the chords into bell chimes. A boy in the Bronx wove it into a beat and sent it to his grandma with a note, "This is what healing feels like dash." They all carried Sister Emma's spark, each in their own trembling hands. Nobody was crowned. Nobody competed. There were no prizes, just waves. And with each one, the world felt a little less lonely. In time, a Vienna museum, home to history's greatest composers, opened a new permanent display, not a whole wing, just one small room, no fancy barriers, just a worn wooden bench, a tattered rosary, and two handwritten bars of music under glass. Above them, carved in soft gold, were the words, "She played for no one, so her song belonged to everyone." Millions came, not because it sparkled, but because it humbled. In a quiet nook near the room's edge, a small video looped, Sister Emma at the piano in Vatican Square, her last public moment. The footage wobbly, the light patchy, her face unreadable, yet every visitor stayed. Some wept, some smiled, many stood silent. But they all left with something new, a calm that made space for feeling again. Years later, a boy born long after Sister Emma's time, too young to know her story but pulled in by her music, asked his teacher during a lesson, "Who wrote that first?" She thought for a while before answering. "Nobody wrote it," she said. "Someone remembered it. And now it remembers us." The boy, just 7, nodded gravely. "Then I want to remember someone, too." That night, he played 4 notes on a little toy piano. He didn't know where they came from, but when he did, his baby brother stopped crying. And somewhere out there, unnoticed, another ripple started. Some songs we lose, but some songs never lose us. Decades passed. Headlines faded. Cities changed. Borders moved. But somehow, the delicate thread Sister Emma wove with her fingers held strong, sewn through time like a golden stitch across humanity's tattered cloth. The world didn't recall her face, not clearly, or her voice, since she spoke so little, but they never forgot how she made them feel. In neon-lit, chaotic cities, Sanctus still rang out not in grand venues, but in the oddest places, alleys where buskers played under drizzle, late-night buses, the hush of dawn, headphones pressed to tired windows. Maternity wards where worn-out moms hummed to their newborns, not knowing the song's roots, only that it calmed. Music teachers stopped pushing kids to learn scales first, instead urging them to find the quiet between notes, to feel before playing, to listen before speaking. They shared tales of the nun who played for a bishop once, sure, but more so for a world that didn't know it needed healing until her notes hit. By then, it wasn't her song anymore. It had grown into something else, a shared emotional legacy, a sound of memory and mercy, a hymn not to faith or country but to human dignity. In a far-off Mongolian valley, a woman sang it in an ancient throat-singing style, saying it came to her in a dream. She'd never left her region, but when her song played at a global cultural conference, a young Italian girl watching online burst into tears. She'd learned the same tune from a nun in an orphanage, thinking it was just a lullaby. Now she saw it was a lifeline. The melodies multiplied, shifting into brass, strings, wind, even dance. A ballerina in Marseille danced barefoot, draped in gauze and golden light, her final pose echoing a feeling many knew but few had seen, an old woman at a piano, head bowed, hands still. Yet, through it all, the song's soul stayed gentle, unassuming, a presence, not a show. A Kyoto university required music students to write their own take on Sanctus, not to nail it, but to mirror it. They called it the offering dash. No two were alike, and that was the beauty. It was a living score, not fixed, but growing like ivy, wrapping around new voices. Some added grief, others joy. A kid in Johannesburg wrote a single melody line, called it My Father's Voice Dash, and said nothing else. It became a national gem. Soon, the day Sister Emma passed, her quiet death in a candlelit convent was marked in small ways worldwide. Not a holiday, nothing formal, just felt. In the Philippines, kids lit lanterns and sent them down rivers as the lullaby played on bamboo flutes. In Ireland, people gathered in old church ruins, singing it in Gaelic under starlight. In Chile, teens painted murals of nameless pianists, halos glowing not over their heads, but around their hands. Every year in Rome, just before the stroke of midnight on that special date, the Vatican's bells fell silent, and instead, Sanctus poured from the dome itself, its notes washing over the city like a gentle wave lapping at the shore. No one advertised it, yet people showed up, not in droves with flashing cameras, but one by one. A nurse stealing a moment from her shift, a kid clutching their grandma's hand, a widower who'd once swayed to the tune in his lonely kitchen. They stood under the stars, listening not to recall Sister Emma's name but to rediscover pieces of themselves. One year, a blind composer from Canada crafted a version of Sanctus meant only for touch. It had no sound, just vibrations woven into objects you could feel with your hands. When someone asked why, he said, "This song isn't for your ears, it's for the parts of you that know grief and still choose love." Nobody debated or dissected it. There was just quiet, then a faint echo of the melody, not loud or showy, but enough to linger. And so it went on. The world kept spinning, but beneath its clamor, a steady current held strong. A melody hummed in a hospital hallway, an old cassette spinning in a musty attic, a child's fingers tracing piano keys etched into a school desk. The future barely knew Sister Emma, not truly. Her name had faded to a footnote in music history. No viral hashtags, no official songbook, but her echo had woven itself into humanity's quiet corners, a rhythm of compassion, a language of grace. One day, a child far into that future turned to her teacher before a music class, asking, "Where does the song go when we stop playing it?" The teacher gazed out the window, a smile tugging at her lips. "It goes where it's needed," she said. "Especially when no one's listening, that's when it matters most." Outside, the breeze rustled the trees. Sunlight slanted through the glass. And somewhere close, though nobody could pinpoint where, the melody stirred again, not from speakers or strings, but from memory, from the heart. It was enough to pause the world, if only for a breath. Because some songs aren't meant to fade, they're meant to circle back. The loudest voices don't always move us. It's the soft ones, the ones that wait patiently in the stillness, that hit deepest. Sister Emma never craved attention, cheers, or a place in history. She just gave what she had openly, humbly, with her whole heart. Her story reminds us that the truest legacies aren't born under bright lights, but in the shadows where the forgotten spark miracles. Her music wasn't about fame, it was about feeling, mending, remembering. She showed the world you don't need power to make a difference. All you need is truth, one note at a time. Whether you're the custodian, the orphan, the schoolteacher, the refugee, or the kid too shy to speak, your voice counts. Your silence carries weight. Somewhere out there, someone's waiting for the gift only you can offer. So don't hold back, waiting for a green light to shine. Play your note. Share your truth. Let the light find you. The world doesn't need another celebrity, it needs another Sister Emma. That's all for today's tale on Top Stories Hub. Hit subscribe, leave a comment, and tell me what you'd like to see next.